Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Public Safety Committee meeting of August 16th. It's a little bit after 2 o'clock. Chief Reynolds, can I call on you to either lead us in a moment of silence or a short prayer?
God, that you thank you for this day, thank you for this fellowship, thank you, God, for your serve the great city of Charleston. We're so grateful to be a part of making a difference. And we just ask that you bless this time, this conversation, the decisions that we need to make, guide us and help us to make a difference, to make things better. And we ask that you make it.
Amen. Thank you, Chief. Glad to see you in person. So the first item of our business, we're going to defer on our minutes. I understand that they're not prepared anyhow, so I'll entertain a motion to defer our minutes.
Motion to defer.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right, then we're going to move into first a discussion, Chief Courier, about the reinstitution of the Board of Fire Masters.
Good afternoon, everybody. So the discussion surrounding the Board of Fire Masters has been to not necessarily bring back the Board of Fire Masters as it is described in city ordinance, but to bring back an advisor, or to create an advisory committee made up of civilians and council members that will help the fire department with community outreach, community feedback, help us tackle issues such as diversity. So in order to accomplish that, in Chapter 13 of the Code of Ordinances, the roles and responsibilities of the Board of Fire Masters are spelled out. So the intent is not to bring back the board as it is described in Chapter 13 of the Code. It's more of an advisory committee for the fire department. So currently, we are working through Chapter 13, which is the fire prevention section. We're working to modify that code to remove the references to the Board of Fire Masters, for example, appointing the fire chief, and redesigning it to be more of that advisory committee to make sure that the fire department is tracking with what the community expects out of us. So as we complete the revision of Chapter 13, I'll bring it back to the committee and we can discuss further. If that's okay.
Any questions from any committee member? Councilman Shealy, any questions?
Yeah. So, Chief, we're just looking for anyone in the community? Are we looking for people with fire experience, or exactly what are we looking for on this board? I guess.
I believe the trick to this board is going to be to bring in people who don't have fire experience. I don't think that if somebody did have experience, it wouldn't be a bad thing. But one of the points of view that I'm looking forward to exploring is the point of view of somebody who is looking at the Charleston Fire Department, just as most of the residents of Charleston would look at us, recognizing that my point of view is a little tainted because I'm in the fire service. So the intent would be to bring in people from across the community, probably without any fire service experience, to make sure that our thoughts and their expectations are aligned.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't answer your question, Councilmember Shealy.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Chief Curry and I have had several discussions about this before, and I agree with them. We're not trying to reinstitute what it was in the past. I think those days are sort of gone behind us, but this will give a little bit of a sounding board and some input from the community as to the expectations of the department. I think we've got something similar with the police department along the same lines anyhow. And as we're getting into this discussion of salary and retention, they may serve a function in that role as well. So we will look to get an ordinance reinstituted, I suspect.
Yes, sir.
And Julia's behind you, so we'll look at the legal department to help us with that draft. Anything else we need to discuss, Mr. Mayor? Mayor, you got to turn your microphone on.
We have the Citizens Police Advisory Committee, right? And this would be totally consistent with having, you know, that kind of thing. The
Mhm.
intent is really about the same, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I believe that's, the idea was not to necessarily bring back the Board of Fire Masters. The idea was to mirror what the police department has, but
Right.
then for historical purposes, to term it the Board of Fire Masters, since that is what was known in the past.
Right. Well, I guess that was the point I was going to get to next, was whether that term is appropriate. Fire masters, I think, pertinent to Councilmember Shealy's question, indicate somebody who's experienced, who knows the business, and all like that.
Mhm.
And so, it's just something we ought to think about, whether we use that term or something similar, like you've already called it, an advisory committee, but let's just think about that.
My uncle was on the board, Clarence. I can tell you, he had no idea about how to put out a fire or climb a ladder or hold a hose. I think he got on the board because we sold some uniforms to the city, along with the parochial school uniforms. I think that was sort of a package deal, but I'm not sure Clarence Shade had much fire experience, Mr. Mayor.
Something to think about.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, good point, though. I understand. We don't want to confuse the public with what we're trying to accomplish here. But I think there's a need for it, and I think it could serve a purpose for assisting our relationship with the community and the department.
Absolutely.
All right. We've got a lot of other meaty things to talk about. One is and we may want to get out of order a little bit, but we're going to talk about the fire department personnel, salary, and retention issues. And we may just want to jump into the police department part of that as well, right after we tie into the fire department and skip around if that's okay with the committee. So Chief Curry, why don't you lead us off with your discussion for us about fire department pay and retention?
Absolutely. Well, first off, I want to extend my thanks to the committee for inviting Chief Reynolds and me in to discuss the issue. Obviously, it's an important issue all across the city. It's important to the fire department. It's important to the police department. I will say, as we talk through things, without a doubt, the number one issue that is articulated to us when a person is leaving the fire department is that it's an issue of pay. Before I get into the specifics, I do have to acknowledge the fact that Kay Cross from Human Resources and Amy Wharton with BFRC have done a phenomenal job and a phenomenal amount of work to get the city where it is. I know that there's some things on the agenda for Ways and Means and for council tonight. So I do want to extend my appreciation to them. My goal here is to make sure that Charleston Fire Department is competitive with the region and that we stay competitive. So here are a sampling of issues that we are dealing with in the fire department. Obviously, morale is an issue. And if I think back to 2018, when I came through the door, I believe the morale issue was for a multitude of issues. And we've been doing lots of work on trying to build the morale, trying to build the team, trying to build the family aspect of the Charleston Fire Department. I would say that at this point in time, the number one driver of morale or the lack of morale is the pay issue and the things that go along with the pay issue. What happens when we can't retain firefighters and what we have to do to make sure that the fire apparatus are staffed. We have a pretty consistent discrepancy between the conversations that are had. Is the conversation annual salary or is the conversation hourly rate? Because different points of view can get articulated clearer through those different conversations. I think we need to hone in on one central conversation. As we go through the presentation, you'll see it is somewhat in the weeds, but part of the conversation has to be what firefighters are paid versus the cost of living in the Charleston area. And then we also have to look at the pay that Charleston firefighters are making compared to what other fire departments are making. Because as much as we don't want to say we want to get into a race with our neighbors as far as fire departments, the fact of the matter is firefighters are a very portable workforce at this point in time. Every municipality needs them. So the fact that they have a skill set that takes months and months to acquire, but then it's one that can go anywhere in South Carolina, we have to factor in. When we talk about retention of personnel, by and far, the employees in the 0 to 4 year range for the Charleston Fire Department are the ones we're losing the quickest, followed by the 5 to 9 year employees. The issue with that is that we are in a constant training cycle of new employees. In 2018, we ballooned to a number of 79 vacancies in the operations division of the fire department. We have cut that vacancy number down to 30. Simply put, our training staff doesn't have time to do anything but train new firefighters. Later in the presentation, you'll see that we're losing firefighters on an annual rate at about the same pace that we can train a person who doesn't have any fire experience whatsoever. So it's hard to cut that gap from 79 to 30 to full staffing. All this causes burnout, which then is a part of the reason that we see increased leave usage in the fire department. So as I go into this, I will have to say, I'm aware that there are different salary numbers that are coming before council this afternoon and this evening. This presentation was designed with the old numbers, $38,900 as a firefighter day one on the fire truck. So I know that we're talking about increasing the start pay. I know we're talking about slicing up the first couple of raises that a firefighter can get. And those are vital actions for the city. I believe doing that for firefighters, doing that for police officers, and doing that for a whole host of other people in the city is the right thing to do. But the fact is, right now, if we have a recruit firefighter who comes into the fire department on day one and has to go through the fire academy, that firefighter is not making $38,000. That firefighter is making $35,900. One of the issues that I talked to Kay Cross about last week is that if and when these pay adjustments go in later this evening, that recruit pay of $35,987 is not slated to move. And I think part of the reason it's not slated to move is because $35,987 equates to $17.30 an hour. So if the conversation is hourly rate, any increase in $35,009 drives up the hourly rate. And I know we're trying really hard as a city to try to get the hourly rate that a recruit makes versus the hourly rate that an entry-level firefighter makes. We're trying to get that gap closed. So one of the proposals I mentioned to HR last week is that if we want to keep recruit pay at $35,900, we could possibly offer a signing bonus of $4,000 or $5,000. That would keep us from going from $35,900 as a recruit. You go through 6 months of training, and then you graduate and you go into the operations division of the fire department. Right now, you would make $38,900 if you have a high school diploma. With the proposed changes, you will go to $43,000 and some dollars. So to keep that gap from $7,000 or $8,000, we could offer a bonus.
Chief, this is a curveball thrown at you a little bit. But
Okay.
At $36,000, do we have an idea what the average take-home pay is for that?
Yes, sir, we do. I'll have a slide for that.
Okay. I'll wait for you to get to that slide.
Thank you. So one of the issues within the fire department, and again, this goes back to the conversations that we need to have. If you're a recruit firefighter, you make $35,900. You graduate the fire academy, you go into the operations division of the fire department and you make $38,900. Your pay goes up $3,000 almost, but your hourly rate decreases from $17.30 an hour to $12.88 an hour. The way I like to equate that is we're bringing people in off the street who have no training as a firefighter whatsoever. And we're making a value statement to say, we value you at $17.30 an hour as a person who knows nothing about what it takes to be a firefighter. We train these these recruits for 6 months. And after 6 months, they are functioning as a firefighter. And the value statement we make to them is that you're worth $12.88 an hour to us. Now, I think a constant rebuke or rebuff in that respect is that they're working so many more hours with the additional 824 hours per year that the hourly rate has to go down to make the numbers work out, which then transitions us to an annual salary conversation, and it just muddies the water. What I would say is, as the Charleston Fire Department becomes more busy than it has been at any point in the past, and we look at our call volume, what we see is that the concept or the idea that firefighters are sleeping through the night is a fallacy. Yes, Councilmember Seekings.
Well, very basic question for you is, when we take this up and start thinking about it, from your perspective as the chief,
Can you speak into the microphone?
should we be thinking about this as a salaried position or an hourly position?
Well, I think,
All at every level,
pardon?
right?
I think if it's salaried, if it's exempt or non-exempt, obviously our firefighters fall into the non-exempt
Right.
category. I do think that, at least for clarity in the conversation, an annual salary is a different conversation, and it's one that's easy to grasp. Typically, when we're calling different fire departments, calling different municipalities, and we say, what are you paying your firefighters? They're not going to say we're paying them $15.12 an hour. They're going to say we're paying them $44,500. And here are the incentives that are involved if somebody wants to make more money. So I do think the annual salary conversation is easier.
And I agree with you. I mean, I get the hour, but when you do it on an hourly basis there, it looks like, that on a take-home basis annually, an entry-level firefighter is making less than a recruit, which isn't true. But
Right.
on an hourly basis, if you have that conversation, it's a dramatic difference.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I think in the end, in the end, all of us who get paid, it's how much money are we putting in our pocket at the end of a day, week, month, or year?
Right.
That's what we're all concerned about when we go to work.
Mhm.
Us included. My $296 city council paycheck hit my checking account today. It's the take-home pay,
Yeah.
right? All right.
Yeah.
But the other point, Councilmember Seekings, I think that while you're on the subject, is these firefighters work a straight 24-hour shift.
Mhm.
So when we look at other employees, maybe unsworn, we're looking at them working a 40-hour work week, but it's an 8-hour day. And then, I mean, that's not true for some of our department heads, obviously, but other employees, it's a traditional 9 to 5 type of situation. These men and women in the fire department are working a straight, full 24-hour clock day. It's a harder shift to work. And when you break it down by the hours, which is probably not a good way of looking at it, but when you look at the harder hours to do. So, I mean, I think your point that you're trying to make with this is we try to look at things in apples to apples, oranges to oranges kind of comparison. Firefighters are just sort of in a different box altogether on how we address this. And thinking what you said earlier that, well, then they're not really working, they're hanging out at the fire station, sleeping. That's just a bunch of junk. Be thinking that way. That mindset has to change. That mindset has to change rapidly.
I will say, to add to that, I think you're correct. And well before I came to the Charleston Fire Department, within the Charleston Fire Department, there has been a huge push to professionalize the fire service. And that's just not Charleston, that's across the country. So in a typical day in the fire department, you come into work at 8 o'clock in the morning and your day is filled with training to make sure that your skill set stays proficient. It's hydrant maintenance, especially important on the peninsula with the older water system that we have. It's going through buildings and making sure we know where the hazards are and that we can record those so that they get articulated to companies during an emergency. The second half of the day is a little bit of study time if you're going for promotion, but then the call volume throughout the 24-hour period is pretty steady. A third of the calls occur in the first 8 hours, a third of the calls occur in the second 8 hours, and a third of the calls occur in the last 8 hours of the 24-hour period. So the activity coupled with the professionalism of the fire service really creates a situation where, not in all instances, but in a lot of instances, there is little downtime.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Chairman, and based on this discussion, I think it's a no-brainer to switch mode and be talking about annual salary. I mean, you're basically talking apples and oranges here, the recruits versus the firefighters. You got a firefighter who by definition is working nearly 56 hours a week, 56 hours a week versus someone who's working 40 hours.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just the math, the way the hourly rate works out, right? I mean, another way to handle it would be to require your recruits to work 2,904 hours a year.
Right.
And their hourly rate would go down, right?
Absolutely.
Because I don't think we'd automatically be giving them a raise by doing apples and apples that way with the hours. So the easiest way is just to do the annual salary. Let's do that. Yeah.
No, and I think you just have to, we have to establish a baseline for what is a annual salary. Let me back up and ask this other question, because you had mentioned this, Chief, and said that when these recruits come in, they have got no experience at all. We do hire from time to time experienced firefighters, but we retrain them, right?
We do. We put them through a 10-week training course. Our normal training for people who have zero exposure to the fire service, that training is 26 weeks long. If we hire people with previous training, that's a 10-week training period. And for as standardized as the fire service is, there are nuances contained to each fire department, especially a fire department this size. So we go through 10 weeks of training to make sure they know how to do the Charleston methods.
And Mayor, when I did the math, looking at this report earlier, and Chief, correct me if I'm incorrect on this. If we did a 1730-hour rate, then an incoming firefighter would earn about $50,000 a year. Their starting salary would be close to $50,000. So as we set the standard on this, we just have to make sure what we're setting the standard at what rate and how to do that. At $17 and something cents an hour, that's close to $50,000.
Yeah. It was all done just to compensate, the fact that they were working different schedules and hours, and we should go to the annual salary. That'd be a lot simpler.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, great. The last slide here, and it will be important for the last bullet point, and it will be important for the next slide, is that if you look at the pay scale for Charleston Fire in 2014, and then you compare it to 2022, you'll see that pay increased in the operations division. Pay increased $2.15 an hour over 8 years, from $10.73 an hour to $12.88 an hour. And I do have to say, every comparison or every number I'm throwing out is for an entry-level firefighter with a high school education. If we look at what it costs to live, and I may be repeating things that everybody already knows, but from 2014 to 2022, hourly rate went up $2.15 an hour, but home prices went up 65%, rent increased 132%. So if you look at the average home cost in Charleston right now, it comes in at $386,600. If you look at rent in Charleston, rent in 2014, the average was,
It does that from time to time. It just dies.
okay. It is? Oh. It was $1,000 in 2014. In 2022, rent right now is averaged at $2,432. According to rent.com, and this was just pulled last week, South Carolina has the largest year-over-year change in rent, going up 84.6% from 2020 to 2021. The average cost in 2020 for an apartment was $810. The average cost right now, $1,494. Now, if you look at just the area, what do apartments cost right now? A studio apartment's about $1,100. And the average, if you look at studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, and 4 bedroom, we're at about $1,400 a month. You know, why is that important? It's important because of what the firefighters are bringing home. And I realized that as I'm talking about this is an issue citywide. I totally acknowledge that. What I will say though is it's hard to take a firefighter and have that firefighter leave the department. The recruitment, the hiring, and the training cycle is over a year. And in that year, what we're trying to do to just keep the trucks on the road is incredible. Talking more about apartments, I did a simple search. I went on to Google and I put in apartments, Charleston, South Carolina. And this was last week. Now I realize that the writing is small, but in the upper left, it's the Palms Apartments where we had that major fire several months ago. A 2-bedroom apartment is $1,065. If you go down Ashford Palmetto Square, which is on Sam Rittenberg, a 1-bedroom is $1,045. We go over to the upper right, Blue Water off Savannah Highway is $1,589. And then Canehoy Point Apartments in the lower right is $1,499. So I adjusted my search, and instead of saying apartments, Charleston, South Carolina, I said inexpensive apartments, Charleston, South Carolina. And what I got was, let me turn my page here. What I got was Palmetto Grove in the upper left, which is in West Ashley. It's $1,300. Bridgeview Village, which is on the peninsula, is $1,292. Pinecrest Green, which is on Raoul Wallenberg in West Ashley. Now, this one is considerably less. It's $642 a month. And the one in the bottom right, which is Magnolia Downs in West Ashley, that one is $780 a month.
If
So-
they're available.
If they're available. So here, this goes to your question earlier, Councilmember Shade. What does a Charleston firefighter, what does a new Charleston firefighter bring home? So if we look, these are personnel who have graduated the fire academy and they go into the operations division. Day one, they're going to ride a fire truck today. So we have short checks and we have long checks, and they're dependent upon the number of hours that you work. In the course of a year, you get 26 paychecks. 19 of those are long checks. 17 of them, are long checks, and 9 of them are short checks. If you do the numbers, and I'm looking at the left-hand example, that firefighter is going to average $2,179 of take-home pay. Yes, council member.
If we just think about salary and go to a salary base and we pay people bi-monthly, why would there be a necessity for short and long checks? Why wouldn't we just pay people in the regular pay periods at their salary rate? We wouldn't have to worry about a short and a long check. You just get the same check every 2 weeks, boom, or every 15 days.
My uninformed opinion agrees with you. I know that.
I like your informed opinion. My mom would like to know that.
I know the human resources has some reasoning as to why there is the short check and the long check. Having the short check and the long check does create some complexity for us. Sometimes personnel won't take overtime in one of these checks because they get straight time instead of time and a half because of the way FLSA treats a firefighter. But I'm gonna look at Chief Cruz, and do you have any additional information about why we couldn't pay level?
It was difficult because of the hours worked. According to FLSA, you get what's called emergency overtime. And that rate would have to be figured on hourly basis if we were not.
Okay, Mr. Councilman Siddiqui.
It seems to me we're making it more complicated than it needs to be, because you can always capture that. I mean, you can do a quarterly reconciliation or a biannual reconciliation.
Mhm.
I mean, I think the long check, short check, I mean, does every other department in the country do it that way? I bet they don't. And I think we need to look at that, because I think that creates a lot of confusion. One of the things that I will just tell you, let's get on the record, we all want firefighters and everybody else in the city to make as much as we can afford. We want them to get paid for what they do at a rate that they're, if not happy about, at least understand that we're doing the best we can for them, right? And I think the more complicated we make it and the more math we put into it, it gets people thinking in a way that in the end doesn't get to what really we want to know is, what are you putting in your pocket at the end of the day, week, month, year? And I think this long check, short check thing, and you and I've had a lot of conversations about this. I've had it with Amy. It's confusing.
Mhm.
And it, in the end, adds up, right? And I just don't understand why we can't capture it at some point of reconciliation rather than doing this long check, short check thing.
That's why we're having this meeting, to have this
Right.
discussion.
And I'm with the mayor on this. I think in the end, I want to know how much they're getting paid a year.
Yeah.
That's what I want to know. And I want to max it out.
Mhm.
And I want to make sure that recruits and rookie firefighters, all the way to the top, they know what their pay scale is. They know we're getting paid. As we bump them, they bump them. And all this is so darn confusing.
Yeah.
And I think it's created a lot of angst. And if we're going to do this, let's figure out the conversation we're having. We're
Mhm.
having an hourly rate. I mean, as you put all this up here, we're getting away from hourly, then boom, we go back to short, and long checks based on hours.
Yeah.
Makes me crazy.
So far, what I've heard is takeaways are to discuss with HR pay leveling, and also to switch the conversation from hourly rate to annual salary. Okay. Great. So if we start to transition and we look at what other fire departments are paying, in many instances, there are other departments that are paying more with a lower cost of living. Like I said before, firefighters are now a mobile workforce for us. Yes, sir.
Well, to drive home the point, when you went and did this survey, did you translate it from hourly, or is that the number you got?
This was the number.
Thank you.
That was
Okay. I've now made my point, finally.
Yes, sir.
We got where you coming from. We got where you were coming from, Councilman Siddiqui.
Just to make sure we're consistent with other fire departments, where my understanding is when we lose recruits, they're going to other fire departments, that when they call up and say, I want to apply and how much they're going to get paid, they don't tell them what the hourly rate is.
Mhm.
They tell them what they're going to get paid annually,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes,
So if retention is our issue, we got to look at these numbers.
yes.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. So if you start to look at pay and what other fire departments are paying. Right now, the city of Raleigh in North Carolina is at $46,500 for a person who knows nothing about the fire department. I'll show you a slide in a couple of minutes, and it'll show what they are paying personnel who are previously trained. And obviously, if we lose a firefighter from the city of Charleston and they go to Raleigh, they're going to get a higher pay. And I will have to reiterate the fact that we talk about $38,936 as the start pay for a Charleston firefighter. That's a Charleston firefighter who's trained and is already functioning on a fire apparatus. If we bring somebody in who doesn't know anything, that person is making $35,900. So if you look at this slide, these are screenshots from the last 2 weeks. And if you look up in the upper left-hand corner, that's Lexington County, obviously in the Columbia area. They are advertising to bring firefighters in at $18.27 an hour. That was an hourly rate versus an annual rate. They're giving a $5,000 signing bonus. North Charleston, which is the bottom left-hand corner. North Charleston is at $45,880 for a firefighter slash EMT, which is the basic level that we train our firefighters to. So coming through the door, $45,880. Upper right, Raleigh, for trained firefighters, currently $49,369 with a $4,000 signing bonus. And then down in the the lower right, you have Hilton Head. When we pulled this, it was $44,700 for firefighter EMTs. I have not confirmed, but I've heard that that's gone to $50,000 in their current budget year, but I have not confirmed that. We talk about what it costs to train a firefighter. And this is really, we're transitioning from the pay to the retention, but it's so important for us to retain our firefighters. This is one of those professions, and I think that Chief Reynolds would say the same for police, but this is one of those professions in which experience truly increases the safety of the people we're protecting and the personnel doing the work, the firefighters. So for a 6-month fire academy, when you start to figure training, equipment, salary for the first 6 months of training, and then you transition them to the operations division for their next 6 months, what we come up with is that it costs a little over $60,000 to train and equip every one of our firefighters. $60,000. So with our pay scale, we break even at year 8. That's if these firefighters promote when they have the opportunity to promote. It takes us 8 years to break even what we spent to equip them and train them, and then what they're making in their annual salary. Now, this is important to us because we had 78 vacancies. We've got it down to 30. The biggest group that we lose is 0 to 4 years. The pay adjustments that will come before council later tonight address 0 to 4 year employees. It's a huge first step to having us retain our firefighters. But if you look in the highlighted section on the left part of the screen, in 2020, we lost almost 65% of our resignations came from firefighters in the 0 to 4 year category. Last year, 61.5% of our resignations came in the 0 to 4 year category. Yes, council member.
You go and ask them what they're going to do.
Absolutely.
Okay, what are they going to do?
Most of them are going, if they're leaving the area, they're going to another fire department. If they're staying in the area, which is not the norm, they're going to private industry making more money, which I don't want the point of this conversation to be private sector versus public sector. But I do think if it's a fire department that they're going to, it's worth diving into to find out what the reasoning is. And it's typically pay.
The bottom line is this: we train these guys and these women very well, and they go off making more money someplace else.
Yeah. There's a saying in the Charleston Fire Department that we train the world's best firefighters.
Yep.
So we obviously, if we're going to spend $60,000 to train them, we want to keep them. If you look over on the right-hand side of the slide, this is breaking that 0 to 4 year grouping down into the actual years, 0 to the 4 year mark. You can see in 2018 and 2019, a third of our firefighters in each year weren't even making it past their first year. They're getting $60,000 worth of training from us, and then they're leaving. And typically they're going to another fire department. So that's part of the reason it's so critical. Now, if you look at this slide, it clearly states that the fire department is in better shape than the rest of the city. And that's great for the fire department. I think instead of saying it's great for the fire department, it probably needs to be, it's bad for the city. And, it's a huge problem to address. Our average turnover rate from 2014 to 2021 was 9.2%. Now, the Charleston Fire Department is a metro-sized fire department. That means it's a fire department that has at least 400 paid personnel. So I contacted my colleagues who are chiefs of metro-sized fire departments. And I said, if you will take out the COVID issues, will you tell me what your average expected turnover is year to year? And then back it up with the numbers. The average turnover rate for departments our size, 5.68%. For us, that comes up to be about 20 a year would be average, 20 a year. We're losing about 30 a year. Now, 30 a year, we're paying $60,000 to train them. Our training facility is on Milford Street. The capacity of that training facility, the capacity to recruit firefighters at one time, without COVID being a consideration, I can train 26 firefighters at one time. And that's a 6-month training period. So there's no way I can do 26 firefighters, graduate them, and do another 26 firefighters.
You're running really fast and not even staying in place.
Exactly. So I'm losing firefighters faster than I can train new firefighters. And again, that experience is walking out the door for us. That's why this is so vitally important for the fire department. Now we get to burnout. If we look at our leave usage from 2018 to 2022, we see that leave usage on the whole is up 42%. Now, it can be for a couple of reasons. One, we went from 78 vacancies to 30 vacancies. We've got more people who are using time. That's a factor. Firefighters had been accruing sick leave at the same rate that an 8-hour-a-day employee was accruing sick leave. And we worked with HR to get that changed. So they now accrue more in line with the hours they work. So there's more sick time for them to use. But we see leave usage go up in just about every category, but the sick leave usage has really spiked in the last couple of years. And when we ask firefighters, the answer we typically get is that we're just burned out. We need a day. And so for more so for mental health, they're taking a day. There's been a lot of things in the news about forced overtime issues. And what I can say is that if you look at our overtime usage year after year, the actual number stays the same, stays relatively static. It's how that number gets sliced up that changes. Right now, we have far fewer people signing up for voluntary overtime. But if we don't get the voluntary overtime and we need to staff the fire trucks, we have to force people to work. So in 2018, we had much more voluntary overtime, less forced overtime. That has flipped now. We have much more forced overtime compared to the voluntary overtime. Part of that is burnout. Part of that is last year when we were, every single one of us was doing everything we could just to balance the budget and stay within our assigned budgets. We cut a lot of overtime. So people who would typically sign up for overtime to augment their salary, all of a sudden they were going and they're working different jobs. And now they've got a pretty good steady gig working somewhere else. But a sampling, I've got firefighters who are delivering pizzas for Domino's. I've got firefighters who are driving for Uber. I've got firefighters who are working for Lowe's Home Improvement. For the record, all fine companies. I don't want firefighters to do that to make ends meet. I think you said it to me before, Councilmember Shade. If they're working to take themselves on a vacation that they're saving up for, that's one thing. But if they're relying on the tips from dominoes to make ends meet, that's a situation that should cause alarm for all of us.
Chief, before you go on, let me ask you another question.
Yes, sir.
That we talked about. When you go back to the slide that shows this comparison with other departments like North Charleston and who paying more, Myrtle Beach,
Yeah.
St. John's. What is their retention issues, even with their paying more than we are?
I can tell you that the city of Raleigh right now, I believe, has 50 vacant firefighter positions. Their department, I'm going off memory here, it's probably about 550 or 600 personnel. So compared to us, they should be at, I mean, we're at 30 and 30 is not great. With their size department, if they were in the same boat, they'd be at 45. So it's somewhat similar. I can tell you that in this area, North Charleston is having a hard time keeping firefighters. I don't believe St. John's is having much of an issue keeping firefighters. The city of Savannah is having a hard time keeping firefighters. The city of Durham, obviously I know better than the others, is having a hard time. And I think part of the workforce these days is you've given me a skill set that's portable. I will take that skill set.
Yeah.
And when I don't have a family, I'm extremely portable.
So I bring that point out because even in some of these apartments that are paying more than what we're paying here, they're still experiencing a retention issue as well.
They are.
It may not be as stark as ours,
Mhm.
or maybe worse than ours, but the problem is there are other issues underlying this besides pay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't want us to go too much further without that point being made.
Yes, sir.
Um,
So if I go to the last slide, I was meeting with some council members a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that was said to me that stuck with me was, Chief Curia, your job is to advocate for the fire department. And we want you to come to the public safety meeting and we want you to advocate for the fire department. So here are things that I feel we could do to improve the situation. One, and we're already starting to do it with the pay increases that are being proposed for tonight. But the key here is retaining the firefighters that we have. If we can retain those firefighters, we can train up those last 30 firefighters. And for the first time in several years, you can have a fully staffed fire department. That is a real possibility if we can keep the firefighters we have. As we focus on retention, we need to focus on retaining those 0 to 4 year employees. Now, to do that, in looking at pay in fire departments in the region, in looking at the signing bonuses they're offering and looking at the healthcare comparisons, I do think where we need to be is in the upper 40s for start pay. That could be a possibility with the adjustments that will be debated or discussed this evening. And then going into 2023 with a new budget year, that's a real possibility for us. I think that's the threshold of where we need to be. Mid 40s, better, but I think we're gonna lose a bit with people going to our surrounding fire departments or fire departments that are within an hour or two drive of Charleston. Whatever we do, that percentage increase to raise start pay should be applied throughout the fire department, throughout the pay plan that the fire department has, so we can avoid compression issues. I do think that we could look at those firefighters who are topped out in their rank, and when they reach top pay, they get whatever cost of living increase is voted on by council on an annual basis. We could offer them lump sum payments if they have advanced their knowledge base, if they have done what we have asked them to do. Instead of giving them 5% on the top of their salary as the pay plan dictates currently, if you're topped out, you don't get that. We could give them a lump sum payment to reward them for doing work to advance their skill set. Obviously, I am not an elected official, but I do think an important thing that needs to occur is that as a city, we should decide where we want to be in the market. Is it the 95th percentile? Is it the 90th percentile? But we should decide what our threshold is for at least firefighters, police officers, general pay plan employees. And if we decide where we want to be, then we could adopt a schedule to say in year one, we could examine fire department pay with our regional partners. And if we decided it's the 90th percentile, we can easily go to the 90th percentile. In year two, you look at the police department. In year three, you look at general pay plan. Then you go back to the fire department. And we keep it on a schedule so that the lift that Ms. Wharton has in front of her isn't $17 million and isn't $30 million and isn't $40 million. It's something much, much less. Within the fire department right now, our special teams are not incentivized. It's really just if somebody has an interest in hazardous materials, we put them on the hazmat team. If somebody has an interest in marine operations, we train them and put them on the marine unit. But we need to find a way to incentivize special teams, any extra duty that's going on in the fire department, acting pay when we have people who are acting as the officer on a fire apparatus for the day, incentivize that so that people want to do more to make sure that the fire department is functioning the way it should function. Currently, the fire marshal division is not in the fire department pay plan. And we're talking with HR about how to make that happen. And this has nothing to do with pay, but I think it has everything to do with retention. Annual evaluations. There should be a prescribed period of time during the course of a year in which supervisors are having needed conversations with members of their team to say what is going well and what can be improved on. Those things should be documented, and we should use that to provide a roadmap to drive employee performance.
It's incredible to me that we don't have that in place right now. And I just assumed that we were doing that you've got to have an annual evaluation.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That concludes my presentation.
Yeah. All right. Councilwoman Shealy, you still with us?
Yes, sir. Sorry. Yep.
Okay. Any questions for Chief Courier?
Yeah, the only thought there, Chief Curry, you mentioned that St. John's is not having a retention problem. Is there anything that they may be doing differently?
Thank you for the question. The only thing I know of right off the top is that they pay more. I believe they're paying 10 to 15% more to start than we are.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. We are in an hour into our meeting. We got to stop at 4 o'clock. Mayor suggested that we cut through and go to item number 7, which is the equivalent of the police department report on personnel salary and retention. Would the committee be of a mind to go ahead and let's move into item number 7?
I just thought while we're talking about pay, we'd go ahead and cover both the departments. And I want to thank Chief Courier for the presentation. It's very thorough, and I think you've done a terrific job advocating for the team. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I'm going to hand this to Chief Reynolds. I do have to say, I didn't do this all on my own. It's firefighters who have a vested interest, one, in their pay, but they love this fire department and they love this city. So they've done a tremendous amount of work.
Thank you,
Yes,
Chief
sir.
Curry. That was very thorough. And I know you had a lot of help from your staff, so thank them for the work that y'all have been doing. Chief, what do we need to make you more comfortable? You okay just sending right here?
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Think Dan was getting back because usually I take all the time up. And
I know that.
for once, he got to go first.
I
And got
think
it.
y'all two have been around each other too long is sort of the problem. They're rubbing off on some of this stuff.
So Dan did a lot of the heavy lifting. I think there's a lot of presumptions in the inflation, in the cost of housing. I mean, you don't need to look too far to realize that it's a very competitive labor market, and if you go to the first slide here, I start out with what are kind of our expectations. In my presentation, I benefit from a lot of the work that Dan just did because I'm not going to get in the weeds on all those issues. It's more of an assumption that I'll make. It's a competitive labor environment. The city of Charleston residents, the mayor, the council has made it crystal clear to me that they want to have the best police department, that we have the attract and retain. And I list there recruiting, hiring, training, equipping, and leading the best workforce. And every year in the budget, that's what my conversation surrounds. How can we do that? And this is no different. And so I think from the beginning, it's important to set that expectation. If we want to attract and retain the best, if we're going to invest in their training, if we're going to equip them and lead them in the ways that we expect, there's a price for that. And that's, I think, what today's conversation is what is that number? I don't know, but we have to remain competitive. So this is just a chart. All the numbers that you see that we've presented today, there's 2 or 3, there's not a lot, but there's 2 or 3 slides that hit on salaries, have been cut and pasted from Kay and Andrew and excuse me, Amy's presentation to the city. And you'll see in a few minutes just where we're at, kind of like Dan showed, in the scheme of competitiveness with other like jurisdictions in the region and in a couple different states area. So those are some of our starting salaries, as you can see, and this really almost dates back to, and credit to Ruben Greenberg for really emphasizing the importance of education and talent and human talent. And so if you have an education, you get paid more. Your education is valued in our system. The starting pay is not as competitive, and we'll talk a little bit about how some of those adjustments, I think even tonight with the council's discussion, will address some of the starting pay. Whenever you do that, you create compression, you create other issues. And so I think there's a more macro approach that needs to be held in terms of decisions for salaries for the city, which again, I think Kay has done a nice job. And this just articulates some of those positions within the department. Go ahead. So I really think it's important to acknowledge our professional staff. And Dan acknowledged this, that we're not in a vacuum here talking about fire and police sworn positions. That's part of our conversation. We have 115 positions within the Charleston Police Department that are professional staff. If you look at, in a minute, you'll see a slide, the professional staff pay, which is really the non-sworn entity of the city, is significantly off and behind and really needs the biggest correction. I don't see how our professional staff, frankly, they're not making ends meet. And as Dan said, they have multiple jobs. They don't have a lot of the opportunities that maybe are afforded to sworn firefighters and sworn police to be able to work off duty jobs and be able to have extra days off and be able to do other jobs. They're required to work, generally speaking, the 5 days a week, and they're confined to those positions more so. And their salaries, as you'll see, and this, again, I think Kay's made a really good presentation. And
Chief, define professional staff to everybody.
So for the way that I'm looking at it in the police department, but it applies really for the whole city, is anybody who's not a sworn firefighter or a sworn police officer. And we have about 115 positions within the Charleston Police Department that are non-sworn, not gun-toting, not badge-wearing entities. They're people that support our budget. They support, our forensics team. They support anything that you can think of when you walk in and make a complaint at the front desk. Some of our investigators. There's a whole lot of different positions within the police department. Our animal services division. And they're an amazing, amazing group of people, which we could not function without. And as you'll see in a minute, their pay is significantly out of whack.
And that's about 25% of the entire department.
Correct. A little less than that. Yep.
Yeah.
And for the city, Dan's slide and one of my slides references retention. If you look at the city attrition, it's, I think upwards between 25 and 30%. And I don't even see how you can function when you have, and I'll give a shout out. I always talk about the rec department because we work so closely together. To me, it's amazing that they accomplish what they do with, and really oftentimes half the people, half the resources that they need. And so when you think about that, we really need to look closely to take care of those people they're impacting public safety just like we do, you know, when they're out there with the youth and working with the kids and making things happen every day. It's amazing to me what they do with so few people. Go ahead. So this is this is actually cut and pasted from Kay's presentation. On the right, it shows just how far off the mark the professional staff are. They're with the cost of living factor. I mean, they're just leaving left and right. And it is absolutely a pay factor for the sworn police officers. That number has, I think we're worse off than that shows, in that many of those, as Dan articulated earlier, many of those agencies have been implementing pay plans and bumps, and it's just very competitive, and they've seen the same challenge that we have. I know Myrtle Beach and Mount Pleasant and some of the others that are listed on there, North Charleston, have made some pretty substantial changes since that was published. So what are we doing? We're going to continue to work with HR. I think they've done a nice job with their survey on a macro level. I think that they have articulated pretty well the significant challenges that we have. They've looked at this. Salaries is a fairly complex thing. I think it does need to be on a macro level. The annual salary has been kind of discussed today, is what we've been looking at, and how we'll kind of continue to look at this in terms of a profession, and what does that look like in terms of our competitiveness with other organizations and others, and why we're losing people. So I would be remiss in this forum, in this day and age, if I didn't talk about the challenges of policing. It's a noble profession. I'm proud to be a part of this profession. I could never be more proud, in fact, than I am today. I believe, and I tell our command and I tell our troops this regularly, that policing is more relevant, more important, more timely, more capable of solving problems and saving lives today than it ever has been in the history of policing. But it's also more challenging, and we have to do it right. And we have to treat people with dignity and respect. And it takes a very special person to put on this uniform. And there's been a riot a couple years ago. We've had since hundreds of protests. I'd have officers that have been spit on, assaulted, and just maligned in ways that are not easy. And yet I will tell you that our hiring is going very well. And I'm here to tell you that we're making progress, actually, at a time when it is very competitive, when, as Dan said, all of our partnering agencies are struggling. I don't know anybody who's not struggling right now in this country, and dealing with these issues. And most are not, they're losing ground. We're slowly actually making up ground. Our sworn vacancies is around 35, and we have a little less than that non-sworn vacancy. And so, but when you look at that number for our non-sworn, that's a large number. Out of 115, I think we have over 30 vacancies. And so we have to really look at this in a much more complex way. And in a minute, I'm going to have Sergeant Gibson just speak briefly. He and his team have worked with the IACP and with a number of other agencies and local colleges, Clemson, to look at the evidence, if you will. Some of the questions that came up a few minutes ago with Dan, why are people leaving? Well, salary is important. It's extremely important to maintain that competitive edge. But we also believe that people are leaving for other reasons that we can control. Our culture, how we communicate, how we value people. What do we do with technology? How are we implementing processes that value the employees, that make them feel like they're being listened to, that they have input into how we police our communities and how we treat people, and being a diverse organization. And so, go ahead. I'll let Anthony Gibson's our sergeant, he's running our recruiting team. He's been running it for the last couple of years, has gotten some nice recognition around the country to look at this in a much more detailed way. Why are we losing people? Looking at our exit interviews, looking at the data within the city of Charleston, talking to people in the organization, doing surveys within the organization, and looking at ways that we can better support families and wellness. So I'll let him kind of hit on the next couple of slides.
Do you need a chair?
No.
All right, thank you, Chief. When we're talking about retention issues, I think we would be remiss as a department if we did not tell you exactly what we're doing about it. We're not just sitting by idle. We're not watching things happen. We're actually taking a really proactive step. So that also carries into our hiring and our recruitment. So we all know that turnover is in many ways, it's going to be a product of our hiring selection processes. It's important to also highlight that in 2020, we never stopped. So the world essentially slammed on brakes, but our department did not. We were still there. We were still showed up. We were still in service. Despite the challenges of COVID, unemployment, largely a generational shift in the workplace expectations, and also the rhetoric about the policing landscape, we understand that if you do not innovate, you're going to lose your competitive advantage. So we talk about private sector versus public sector, but really it's the same. It still has to be business development and talent acquisition. You have to be selecting the right people if you're going to retain the right people. So our hiring selection process, just to name a few things, it's been completely revamped. It's more streamlined. So what that means is we know what we're looking for and we know how to get it. So we're in the age of now. So if you submit an application, they want to know instantly kind of where you're at. That's where we're at, and especially in our decision-making process. We've established long-term and short-term talent streams in our efforts. So that includes internships. We're one of the first agencies to offer the SkillBridge program internship for our exiting military personnel and their families. Most importantly, we've reestablished and redefined what it means to have a customer service experience to be hired by a police department. So we know that customer service is one of our main priorities as an agency. It starts right when you are interested in the job, and the selection process is an investment experience. So that means customer service. So we're hiring to retain. That's going to be ultimately what we're looking at here. But I do want to caution, we're not going to be complacent in our success. Just because it's going well, it doesn't mean it's going to maintain going well. So it's not reasonable to assume that we can just hire our way out of staffing shortages. And it's well understood it's more efficient to retain an employee than it is going to be to hire and train a new one, especially as you look at deployability of officers. You're talking at least 8 months before they are deployable as an independent entity. So we break down attrition into two different categories, broader categories. So we look at hiring decisions, we look at decisions to leave versus intentions to stay. So our retention team assesses turnover. So when an employee has already decided to leave the agency through exit interviews. Through these interviews, we're going to capture the data that identifies why officers are leaving the agency and the law enforcement career altogether. Identifying these trends is going to allow us to better understand the internal and external motivations for leaving the department. But it also helps us and our leadership to manage the expectations and to better mitigate our immediate issues. However, we are going to take this a step further. So in 2022, in retention, we built a check-in program that captures the critical information to stay engaged with our employees and to measure workplace factors and retention. So in other words, what can we replicate and what can we mitigate to keep our employees? Exit interviews are useful to an extent, but our check-ins are going to allow us a cross-sectional view into the mindset of our current employees, not just the view of a former employee.
So what you're saying, Sergeant, is let's figure out what the problem is before they leave.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So what we do as a police agency is risk management. We're always looking at deterrence versus prevention. That doesn't just apply externally, that's going to apply internally to what we're doing for our officers as well. So through these two processes, we're able to identify trends. I think we've beat it to the ground. We understand that compensation is one of the most critical aspects of retaining and hiring an employee. But we also know that our work environment, our career development, job satisfaction, organizational support, family obligations, and cost of living all mean something. So we are trying to establish what are the boundaries of compensation and where does everything else play a part of this. So we're always thinking years ahead. So in 5 years, we should not, if we're doing it right, be having the same conversation trying to adjust compensation for retention issues. There's much more to it. We're much more complex. So in terms of identifying our trends, nationally, we do understand and is well versed and put out there that retention is going to be a concern for many police departments. But if we look at our annual turnover, relatively speaking, since 2014, your average is right around 11%, 44 officers per year. So if you look on the national scale, sure, we're below, but the chief's definition of leadership is leaving it better than you found it. And that is well understood in our department that our retention rate is going to have to be left better than we found it at this static 11%.
So if you just on that slide, I would be very consistent with what Chief Curia said, that we should be less than half of what those numbers are. Those are high numbers. But I will tell you, my concern is that in the blink of an eye, if we don't give the highest level of support for our police officers, which we do in this region, in this city, people know that the police are important and that they're cared for, and you don't have a lot of the challenges that some other jurisdictions around the country have experienced with defunding and all those types of things. But I will tell you, it is a precarious battle that we have with making sure that we are hiring the best and we have our foot on the gas. We've had our foot on the gas. Since this COVID started, we never slowed down. And I say, even despite all of the hiring that we're doing, I'd rather be $100 short than hire one person who doesn't deserve to wear this badge, who doesn't have integrity, who shouldn't be wearing this uniform, shouldn't be in this profession and be a part of the city. So it's a challenge. And so at any given time, there's so many different factors. It is very, very competitive. And we do have to pay attention to all these things, not just any one single thing, but all of them.
So understanding attrition means that you're able to conceptualize and operationalize your retention, your strategies for retention. So we're taking an evidence-based approach is going to be the first way to do it. I say over and over, and it's something that I've learned from my mentors, the plural anecdote is not data. Know why you're going to do what you're going to do. So a hasty generalization can incorrectly describe your retention concerns. And our retention team has one mission. That's going to be look at the evidence and the data to create one, an impactful, and two, a sustainable retention focused practice and model. This approach is going to extend well beyond just our sworn officers, but it also means something for our professional staff as well. Again, we have one mission and we rely on each other to do it. Currently, extensive research is being done to look at the strengths and the limitations, most importantly, of our retention efforts, because we're trying to reinforce the employee commitment to the organization and successfully focus our employee-directed efforts through our evidence-based practices. The take home from this is that retention and saving a department is not an event, it is a process. It is going to take time. And by doing that, we're under no illusion that we can do it ourselves. It takes collaboration. So when it comes to collaboration, our retention team includes National Institute of Lead Scholars, which comes with a multitude of benefits. We're also looking through we've already been partnered with researchers from Kent State and the University of Cincinnati through the American Society of Evidence-Based Policing. So we're currently in processing. We're creating a large-scale, powerful retention solution, which I'll get to in just 1 second. But our goal is to have specific, measurable, action-oriented, relevant, and time-bound results. This is all done through our high-level analysis and intervention. So retention, especially when it comes to law enforcement, is extremely complex, and the issue involves wide-ranging professional, personal characteristics, all intertwined with what it means to be an employee at your agency. So your intrinsic and your extrinsic motivations. This requires really high-level, in-depth look and studies. So phase one is already done. That was done in June 2020, and it was a it was a survey with our officers to look at workplace factors that influence officers' intentions to either stay or leave with the agency. So at that point, we were able to determine the temperature, if you will, of our agency and who was looking to leave and who was looking to stay. Those results are complete, and I'm going to present them to the command staff shortly in the coming week. But I can tell you this is what we know. Compensation is the number one reason why employees stay. It is also the number one reason why employees leave. So to take it a step further, we also know that there's a correlation between addressing employee needs and the organizational support. So compensation has boundaries in terms of non-monetary motivations to keep your officers. So what we found was that officers that reported higher organizational needs, they were being met, their employee needs were being met, they perceived their salary as being more fair. So right there is your blanket support for your compensation, where it means something more. So salary is one of those things that's not enough until it isn't. It is a good way to attract your talent. It's about motivation, loyalty, and commitment. But we also know attrition is not singular, and it's cumulative over time, and it's multiple issues over time. Phase two is going to be, we're going to be looking retrospectively at our hiring data. We have a ton of it. We're going to see if there's any predictors of attrition or those looking to leave early from the agency. We are going to identify them, and we're going to create an intervention to stop it before they leave. So it's a proactive step to mitigate our attrition concerns and see what we can do. Phase three is going to be a follow-up of all of this. So it's constant looking at it, recalibration, and to see if our intervention strategies are working. So we have to ultimately have the goal of using valid information, not conjecture, to create a plan to regularly assess and adapt for retention issues. And that's where we're headed now. And like the chief said, the foot's on the gas, and we're going to keep on going.
Thank you, Sergeant. Any questions?
I think I got one more slide, and
Okay.
I'll wrap it up. So our next steps are to continue to work with our first line supervisors, different levels of leadership within the organization, to work with partners. A lot of the people that Anthony just referenced are no cost partnerships, other experts, and working, of course, with city HR and BFRC. And I'll tell you, we have recognized that we had to be relentless on this issue. Not only do we need to get the right people, we need to develop them, and we need to keep them. We're a very young organization right now. We're becoming younger every day. So this topic of attracting the best human talent, the best people, diversity in terms of experience and different representatives from different parts of the community coming in with different experiences. That's what makes our organization effective. And it's a very challenging time right now. And so these discussions that we're having, pay is at the forefront, but there's a lot of different factors that are included in this.
Thank you, Chief.
Yep.
Any questions from members of the committee? Councilmember Shealy, any questions for you, for the chief? Is he still with us? Kevin?
Kevin, if you're speaking, you're
Sorry about that. It would not come off mute for some reason. I was clicking, so I apologize. No, thank you very much for that presentation. I don't have any questions at this time, but thank you.
All right, thank you. Chief, I just want to echo what you said for both of y'all. Thank you all for the work you put into the presentation. Thank you we had discussed a lot of this beforehand, so I had an idea where y'all were headed with this discussion. And for both departments, we can't overemphasize the need for a most successful department for the fire department and police department. Chief, it is a noble profession for both of these men and women, which y'all do. Public safety is the number one responsibility of a city. It's making sure that you're there when we need you. We can have the finest houses and the finest restaurants and everything else, but if we don't have this component taking care of our city, we're not much of a city at all. We're not much of a community. So we can't overemphasize that. And I know the challenges are getting higher every year. It's a different culture that we've been engaged in the past several months, several years, both of y'all. And I think what y'all are doing is smart. You've got to stay ahead of the curve. Filter out these men and women who come into the department first to make sure this is a good fit for them. This is the profession that they want to pursue and want to stay with for the next 20, 25 years. That's the goal with all of this. And we keep these folks here. You're going to have attrition. It's just a natural thing happens. People move, people realize this is not the job that they want. People get a better offer somewhere. But we just don't want people to throw up their hands and say, I can't handle it anymore. I'm sick of this job. I'm getting out of here. That's not what we want. We want people to treat this as a profession and stick with us as well. So thank you all both for the presentation and the work that went into this. We've got to take this to heart as to what y'all have offered to us. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. That was a lot of information and a lot of discussion in the past hour and a half. I was trying to keep up with all of that. If I can get a copy of that PowerPoint presentation, I would like to have that in advance. All right, we have addressed on our agenda items 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7. The next items on our agenda are items 5 and 6, which is approval of a mutual aid with the Charleston County Sheriff's Office, and then an approval of an MOU between the City of Charleston Police Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Steve, I see that you were here. Is there a second? Okay. Steve, can you just give us and any further discussion about 5 and 6? Before we make it for our final vote, Steve, can you just give us a quick rundown about 5 and 6 for us, please?
Number 5 is an update to an agreement we already have. It's for our Metro Marine Patrol. Over the years, the contacts in the agreement have changed, so we're just updating all that. So it reflects the current personnel in both offices. And then the second one is a renewal, again, of an agreement we already have. We have a Federal Bureau of Investigation Low Country Violent Crimes Task Force. This is kind of an addendum to that agreement that provides that they can pay overtime compensation to the members of our department who are on that task force, dependent on federal funding. Apparently, we do get some of those payments. It's not a lot, though.
How many folks do you know we have on that task force?
You all know offhand. The FBI Violent Crime Task Force.
2.
That's what I thought, 2 or 3. It's 2.
Now federal court judge Brucey Hendricks and I were the first organizers of the Violent Crime Task Force that was created back in the 1990s, and it was great that we had the corporation, the city police department back then. They sent Chief Greenberg sent 2 folks with us back then from the sheriff's office, Mount Pleasant, but it was a wonderful opportunity. I think the folks who are assigned to that get a lot of experience and help as well.
That's correct, and they spend a lot of time doing the task for that task force. So.
Okay, all right. All those in favor of approving items number 5 and 6, signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right, thank you, Steve, for that was a quick rundown, but appreciate getting that to our attention. The last item, our next last item on our agenda before we adjourn was a request from Councilmember Seahings regarding the discussion on street flooding closure procedures. So do we have somebody from the department?
I think I see Chief Thompson behind
Can you
you.
hear me?
There you are.
There's our man.
I wasn't gonna be there in person. I'll be there later on this evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Kind of muted, Chief.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but you sound like you're in a cave.
What about now?
That's a little bit better.
Let me get my earbuds. Hold on just a second.
Can y'all see, am I blocking this? Y'all can see.
We'll let you know.
I'm sure you will.
We'll let you know if you're in the middle of a big puddle.
All right, you're on.
Did it improve?
Speak up a little bit.
Did it improve now?
You still sound kind of muted. Go ahead.
Would you guys like me to switch to another device real quick?
You're good.
Okay, sorry for that. I've got everything turned up. Thank you for the opportunity. Let me speak briefly on street flooding. A lot of what I will talk about today is what we've done since 2020, so roughly 18 months. And I do credit Councilman Seekings, for getting into my behind a little bit back in 2020 to revamp some of this. So a lot of it is from that meeting and conversation. I know we could always improve, but I feel like we've come a long way since 2020. One thing I just want to make the first topic is emergency management. We're working really closely with them, obviously, but we want to make this a citywide event, not a police-centric event. And emergency management and Mr. Dale Morris has worked really closely with us. They're helping us. We're getting very organized. Sometimes it might seem like we're not organized, but there's a lot that goes into these known flooding events. What kind of it slaps us in the face is a non-known flooding event. Part of the preparation for known events with emergency management is we always have the staff on standby, and we either stand up a virtual PSOC or we have that staff on standby, normally 12-hour shifts, so that if we do need to stand up a PSOC for a weather-related event, we have that staff already identified. So I would say prior to 2020, that was mostly police and fire. Since then, we've now included TNT. We've got obviously our emergency management on there, stormwater, obviously fire, police, and whoever else we need on there, PIO. So we always have that in place. One thing with that is that most people don't know about. Fire have their swift water boats out. All of our discussions, and then rolling in the next topic, flood stat, have been about life safety. Obviously, we want to get those roads closed as quickly as possible, but this is all for life safety. So there's a lot that goes into the preparation for the known events. Sometimes there's so many closures that it just looks like almost like we aren't prepared, or we don't have the resources in place or the amount of resources that we need. And that's some I'll hit on later. We've gotten a lot better since 2020. Moving on, we redid our flooding field guide internally, and part of that is getting our command, everyone, all of our 19 lieutenants and our captains and deputy chiefs on the same page with our flooding response. In that flooding field guide, we've identified 47 closures that need to happen. Anytime we have significant rainfall, when we start seeing closures, sometimes more, sometimes less. But 47 roads are mainly in Charleston Village, theirs that we know. We do have 5 locations that always flood on a king tide with no rain. We know those locations. Our officers know to go right to those locations on the king tides and close those roadways off before the king tide hits. So that is some of our preparation. We do have the bicycle barricades placed all over town. Honestly, we don't like that. The mayor doesn't like that. Council doesn't like that. Right now, that's what we have. We've got some future thinking that I'll go over lastly, but I don't want to leave bicycle barricades sitting all over town for road closures. That's just not a long-term plan. It should not be our plan. But right now, that's what we have. So we have a tracking spreadsheet. We know where all those barricades are. We put more in some areas with higher complaints. We've got some neighborhoods downtown, and then one in West Ashley where they need additional barricades. We've done that. We also outfit all of our teams with high water vehicles for these known events. We have officers ready to go. And those preparations are to prevent those stranded motorists and the public safety part of it. Under that flooding field guide, I'm happy to say that almost all of our command now is trained in GIS road mapping. I have to credit Mark Hueck, his whole team, Tracy, putting a foot behind us and getting us prepared for that. But so now we're almost 100% where all of our commanders are mapping those roads in the middle of the night or whenever, so that the public knows and the media where those are. We have gotten in the process now of not tweeting out every single road closure. We just tweet out our GIS site. That's been working the last several months. Moving on to, and let me back up one thing. I just want to say about flood stat. I kind of quickly went through that. Again, that's not just a police function. That is run by Tracy McKee, who I think was on earlier, but all the departments report out yearly, if not twice a year, on our efforts for flooding. Just some history with that. You know, last year we looked at 3 years prior worth of flooding to see how many flooded vehicles were reported and where those were and where we can pre-stage fire and police so that we don't have any life safety issues or any rescues. That's the ultimate goal. And like I said earlier, we want the streets closed, but the first is life safety. And we want to make sure that those areas that are really, really flood prone are closed first. And so that's one example with flood stat. Captain Bruder's taken over that responsibility for me this year. He said that in January this year, they talked about the sustainable flooding response plan, which is the next topic there. And that's just listed out past versus future. That sustainable flood plan is so that we move forward. So this is not an emergency every time that we have a flooding event, that we have some resources in place, some plans in place. And Dale Morris, he's helping us out with that, or we've asked him to help us out with that. We really allowing him, as I said earlier. But just some of that stuff that's going to include in there is permanent traffic detour options, which was asked in 2020. Message boards. We've seen that when we start alerting for these flooding events that we have a reduced number of flooded out vehicles. I think that's helpful or will be helpful. Dedicated trailers for flooding response. This is something that we've been working on at the request of the mayor again, so we won't have bicycle barricades sitting all over town. That we have purchased some equipment for these closures, and they're kept on dedicated trailers, and we can keep those all around town. Now, those are very expensive. These will include the 3-level barricades that are DOT standard. In the past, we've used these bicycle barricades. In 2021, we purchased a bunch of the 3-level barricades that are being used on King Street and some of our flooding closures, but we have to get to a point where we're using those DOT standard barricades. We've been working with Robbie on that. He agrees. We can't keep putting bicycle barricades out with signs on them. We've got to get up to par on that. We've asked for some lighting towers, some of these flooding areas at night that flood. We've asked for 3 light towers. All that's a lot of money. $450,000 is what we're looking at to maybe get through ARPA funds. But I know that's a separate conversation, but that's forward thinking. That's what we want. Permanent detour signs, whether they're gates coming down at some of these known flood areas, the trailers that we can, I don't want to say hide, but pre-position around town that have the barricades that we need so officers can grab them. The department has switched to SUVs, which in a few years, all officers will be in SUVs with trailer hitches. We can grab those very quickly and deploy them out. Sorry, that was real quick, but I know we're stretched on time, and I'll be quiet for questions.
Yeah, Councilmember Seekings, I know you're going to have the very first question and comment.
No.
So, Justin, thank you. I agree that we've come a long way since we first looked at this in 2020. Of all the things we talked about, one of the things I'd like to sort of just explore and think about going forward is when we have known or predicted events, the pre-deployment. I think announcing pre-deployment is worth kind of getting out there after before we flooded. I think the calls that I get are, maybe getting there a little bit late to the game rather than getting there ahead of it. So I know there's a lot of factors that go into that, but I don't think we as a city or you as a team will ever get criticized for pre-deploying when an event doesn't happen as opposed to being late to an event. So I think it's looking at that, particularly in some of the corridors we know, the ones we're thinking about are those main corridors. Burlington, actually, that's probably the highest volume of complaints we get about traffic going through during the flooding events. So just keep up with your work. Thanks for keeping us up to date. And the other thing I would say is if you're working with Dale and his team, thinking about the future and how we deploy our human assets and then other assets to look at some opportunities for flood mitigation grants and infrastructure grants on flooding side of things, not just on the policing side of things, because obviously we need to part of our output too. So
thank you for all your hard work and hopefully it'll stay dry. Stay dry.
But we do know what streets and what arteries flood historically with a king tide or with a rain bomb that happens. And so we're not reinventing the wheel with this stuff over and over. It's just getting ahead of it. But I think your point, Councilmember Seeking, is about getting the word out fast and often. We had the technology for doing this. And Dustin, I didn't quite hear everything that you said, but what is the mechanism we're using to getting word out that we're closing streets?
Social media. In the past, we've used T&T's message boards. I believe they have two. We use one, or we were using one up on King Street. And so when we had some major king tides, we were putting those message boards out on the crosstown and that type of thing. But currently, we're just using our social media. We redid our social media team probably a year ago. They've been doing really well, pushing things out and staying on top of it, and not waiting on me or one of the other chiefs or somebody to let them know. Again, we can always improve, but we're also making sure that when we have a known event, we're tweeting it out, we're doing what we need to do for social media, then also making sure that they have that GIS link so they can follow. And I know all media picks it up. So the minute we put something on GIS, they're putting it out on the regular media. So I know they're following us on Twitter. But that's our primary mechanism, is getting it out on social media.
So y'all correct me on this. My kids accuse me of being behind the times always on technology, but we have the ability to send out alerts if you sign up for an alert. I mean, we can do that on a city app, or we can do that for other ways, but colleges do that all the time. There's an issue coming up with an active shooter, for instance, now, but if a citizen wants to sign up to receive an alert, we can do that easily. It's just a matter of getting the word out to them about what is available for them to do that.
Yes, sir. I mean, we've had conversations with the Neighborhood Services Division about that very topic. It's brought up about every other month. I think we look at different ways of doing that. A lot of those, I think you mentioned it, are opt-in by our citizens. So it'd be something that, they would have to opt in to something for us to purchase, something definitely we've thought about. But currently we're not using anything like that. We're just relying on our own social media team to get the message out. And then, like I said, the media picking it up from there. I have received, I don't want to hijack the meeting, but I have received some positive feedback that, a tourist came to town. They had no idea about our flooding issues here. And they were following us on social media as they prepared to visit Charleston, and picked it up there and were able to divert around traffic. So I wish I had more positive stories. I know they're out there, but I did receive that. I've received that in the last 6 to 8 months, that one particular story. So I know it's getting out some way, but I agree we could always be better with that.
Councilwoman Shealy, any questions?
No, sir. Other than thank you for your work, Dustin. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilmember Seekers, anything further on that? Mayor, anything further? We've got two other council members that showed up. Y'all have any questions? I'll heard the tail end of this presentation. You made the turn one of those on.
I thought it was quite revealing. And I was just mentioning to the mayor that I really think that all of our departments need to do something very similar, telling us what they need and how to get there. And I thought that both chiefs really articulated that very well.
Yeah.
And I just think that there's something that we need to do with all our departments.
Well, I appreciate Councilmember Seekings bringing this to my attention and getting this on the agenda. It took a while to get us up to this point, but you're absolutely correct.
Councilmember Gregory is referring to the discussion about pay.
Yeah.
With the other departments as well. Not the flooding.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Councilmember Saccharin just sitting there nodding. All right. We are actually 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Any further business to bring before the this committee? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Thank you all for the presenters here.